I doubt strongly that I'm the ideal husband. My job is quite stressful, and there are times when I come home a bit grumpy. Perhaps I'm not the best provider either. I'm definitely no millionaire, but we manage fine. We have a nice home, 2 luxury cars. My wife has a closet full of beautiful clothes, and our 8-year-old daughter Jennifer has tons of expensive toys. Ultimately, I'm just a simple, hard-working guy who loves his wife and family. Linda and I have been married for nearly 12 years, and for the most part, those years have been heavenly. I say for the most part because for the last couple of months or so, something just hasn't felt right between Linda and me. It's hard to pinpoint, but she's been acting strangely, somewhat aloof. On numerous occasions, without reason, she's found fault with something I did or said. That's just not like her. I attempted to discuss it, asking if she was upset with me for some unknown reason, but like all women, she'd insist that nothing was wrong other than feeling a bit tired or having had a bad day. Initially, I thought I'd give her some time to work out whatever was bothering her. However, as time passed, her detached attitude became old and downright aggravating. Apart from her attitude, as any married couple knows, a troubled relationship with your spouse affects closeness as well. I've always worked hard to keep our love life spontaneous and exciting, often starting foreplay by bringing a dozen roses home after work. In the past, such gestures never failed to lead to a fulfilling night. Lately, though, my romantic deeds are met with mere thanks and a peck on the cheek. Instead of accepting my expressions of love for what they are, it's as if she thinks there's some feeble attempt to make up for something I did wrong. It's been weeks since Linda initiated closeness, and my advances are either met with disinterest or the classic headache excuse. On rare occasions when she agrees, she remains passive while I do all the work. As time passed, I realized I was starting to mentally detach from the situation. I'd go home, play with my daughter, and pay as little attention to my wife as possible, making things worse. I felt desperate, so when I had a minute or two at work, I began going over things in my mind. I thought back to when and how everything started. I tried to recall if I had done something that might have triggered the change in Linda's attitude, but was coming up empty. I ran a dozen different scenarios in my head, attempting a cause and effect analysis. The more I thought about it, the more one unthinkable explanation for Linda's behavior kept popping up. I wondered if it was possible. Could my wife be cheating on me? I told myself no, she would never do such a thing. But every time I tried putting 2 and 2 together, it was coming up 3. Me, Linda, and a lover. I tried telling myself there was simply no way, but you know what they say about curiosity. I did some reading on what kind of things to look for, differences in behavioral patterns, attire, schedules, and the like. Honestly, I hadn't noticed Linda wearing any revealing clothes or dressing handsomer. But then again, I only see her when I get home after work. Who knows how she dresses during the day? I also had no idea of her schedule. She's always running here or there. For what? Again, who knows? When it came to her change in attitudes, though, some of the symptoms sounded remarkably familiar. Considering hiring a private detective crossed my mind, but lacking concrete evidence, my thoughts were fueled only by suspicions, insufficient to justify the expense of a PI. Thus, I initiated my own investigation. Activities included calling the house during the day, discovering that she was home sometimes, and not others. I then obtained an old external surveillance camera, discreetly mounting it beneath the garage eaves. Connected to a hidden tape unit behind some paint cans, my objective was to spot any unfamiliar cars at the house. However, after 2 weeks, no such cars appeared. Observing my wife leaving the house a few times, claiming she was home all day, the duration seemed too brief for any significant occurrences unless her boyfriend possessed astonishing brevity. Perhaps these were minor errands she deemed insignificant to mention, definitely not evidence of an illicit affair. As time passed, with no proof of wrongdoing, my suspicions intensified. Our worsening moods and the absence of closeness for weeks left me frustrated. Approaching our 12th anniversary, I viewed it as an opportunity to inject some fun into our relationship. Having not enjoyed a night of dinner and dancing for a long time, I hoped it might rekindle the spark in our marriage. Ready to give it a try, we arranged for Jennifer to stay at my folks' house for an unrestrained evening. I booked a table at Plato's, one of Linda's favorite restaurants. As the matriarch D escorted us to our table, I hoped for the return of our old magic. But for some reason, Linda appeared a bit tense. Ordering a bottle of wine with dinner, I observed Linda starting to relax and revert to her old self. Our conversation became light and playful. Post-dinner, it was evident my lovely wife was eager to hit the dance floor. Although I suggested trying a new dance club that had opened recently, Linda convinced me to go to our usual spot, a nice venue with romantic lighting and a cozy dance floor catering to an older crowd. They played danceable music, sparing me any arm twisting. Not a bad dancer, if I may say so myself. This shared love for dancing was one of the things that brought Linda and me together. Securing a private table for two, we ordered drinks, took a sip each, and then strolled over to showcase more than the two-step. It felt like old times, and we both had a great time. After almost an hour of continuous dancing, we returned to our table for a break. I settled into the chair without fully sitting, while Linda took a sip from her glass of wine before excusing herself to the ladies' room. As I envisioned future bliss, watching my lovely mate gracefully sway her hips, I realized I wasn't the sole observer of her charms. Seated alone at a corner table on the opposite side of the dance floor was a very good-looking guy, attentively observing Linda's every step. Briefly, I thought I saw her make eye contact with him, prompting me to wonder if they knew each other. As she disappeared into the restroom, the guy seemed to glance in my direction with a smug look, though it was challenging to confirm from that distance. The venue strictly being a dance club, I pondered why a guy would come alone, concluding that, like Linda, his date was probably in the ladies' room. I kept a watchful eye on him while awaiting my beautiful wife's return. Walking past him on her return, I was certain I saw them both smile and exchange glances. Suddenly, all my suspicions resurfaced. "Honey, would you mind getting me another glass of wine? This one is stale," Linda requested as she sat down. Already feeling uneasy, I didn't like the idea of Linda sitting alone while I waited at the bar for a busy bartender to fill my order. Looking around, I caught the eye of a barmaid. I'd swear Linda looked disappointed as the young lady came to the table to take our drink order. I had a sense that the evening was taking a turn for the worse, feeling it in my bones. Glancing back, I noticed the guy in the corner still sitting alone. I inquired, catching Linda by surprise about the guy. There was a momentary panic in her eyes before she composed herself. I could tell from the uncomfortable tone that I was on to something. I pressed about the guy. She was supposedly making glances at on the way to the bathroom. She innocently countered, denying making glances at anyone. As our drinks arrived, I saw her eyes quickly flick over my shoulder. The man walked up to our table without even acknowledging me. He asked her to dance, and I immediately declined. That drew a response from him, claiming he was talking to the lady. I retorted that the lady is my wife, and I decide who she can and can't dance with. Linda chimed in, accusing me of being rude. I questioned her about knowing the guy, catching her off guard. She hesitated and explained he was the one she was talking about. I expressed my frustration, stating he asked her to dance without acknowledging me, deeming it not just rude, but extremely disrespectful. The man attempted to interject, but I cut him off, telling him I didn't need his input. Turning back to Linda, I continued, saying that if he had asked if I would mind them dancing together, I might have said okay. But now, there was no chance. She responded with an edge to her voice, calling me silly and asserting that nothing was going on between them. She reminded me that while we were married, I didn't own her and she wasn't my slave. If she wanted to dance with someone, she would. I couldn't believe my wife was speaking to me like that, displaying a level of disrespect she had never shown before. I was furious, and any hopes of a romantic evening with her disappeared. Despite my anger, I tried to hold my temper as she continued speaking. Linda expressed a desire for fun in a much sweeter tone. I reminded her that it was our anniversary and that I wanted to have fun with her. Watching her dance with someone else wasn't my idea of fun, especially after I had asked her not to dance with him. I acknowledged that I didn't own her and I couldn't stop her from dancing with him. However, I warned her that if she did, she should get him to take her home, as I would be gone after 12 years together. I could read Linda like a book, and as she looked into my face, her expression was one of anger, though I was surprised she couldn't see the same in mine. I mentioned the impoliteness of making the gentleman stand there while we argued. Linda snapped back, declaring she would dance with him, and we could talk about it later. The jerk had a triumphant smirk as he extended his hand for her to take. Linda placed her hand in his, and they walked to the dance floor together. I left before they even started dancing, and I doubt they noticed my departure. 8 blocks away, my cell phone rang. In a contrite voice, Linda inquired about my whereabouts. I mentioned that I was on my way home to pack a bag. She questioned why and where I was going. I responded that I didn't know yet, but was determined to get away. I asserted that I had had enough. Linda expressed disbelief over my decision, emphasizing that it was just a dance, and one lousy dance at that. She questioned whether I intended to throw 12 years of marriage down the drain over a dance. I clarified that it had nothing to do with the dance, mentioning my concerns about our relationship. I shared my suspicion of her potential infidelity, particularly with the man she had just danced with. I pointed out the lack of respect he showed, similar to that of someone involved with a married woman. Linda, now speaking in a softer voice, denied any wrongdoing, expressing love and respect for me. I challenged her, citing the absence of closeness between us for over 2 weeks, her disengagement during our encounters, and her recent grumpiness. I accused her of not respecting me, highlighting her behavior that evening. The phone remained silent until she finally apologized. She acknowledged her actions, expressing regret for how she had behaved that night, and for giving the impression of an affair. Linda admitted to noticing the man and exchanging glances while dancing, but insisted that it meant nothing. She pleaded for me to come back and pick her up. I refused, reiterating my decision to leave. I reminded her of my warning that if she danced with that guy, she would need to find her own way home. I informed her that I was pulling into our driveway, intending to be gone by the time she arrived. I suggested that if she was having an affair, perhaps she should go home with the other man and forget about me. Linda pleaded with me, expressing her desperation and assuring me that she was not having an affair. She suggested grabbing a cab and asked me to stay put until she got home, emphasizing the need to talk things out. Despite the earlier tension, her tone had changed significantly. She begged for understanding before hanging up. I pulled into our driveway, went upstairs, and packed a bag. I was out of the house in 12 minutes flat. I wondered if she was really going to take a cab home, or if the jerk would drop her off. So I drove down the block, turned off my lights, and waited to see. About 15 minutes later, a yellow cab pulled into the drive. Linda got out and ran into the house. I saw what I wanted to see, so I took off for a motel. Almost immediately, my phone started to ring again. I turned it off. I still had no proof of infidelity, but I had very strong suspicions. I was almost positive Linda and the guy she danced with knew each other. I thought now might be the time for that private detective. If I wasn't home, maybe she'd go to her lover for consoling. The next day, I went through the yellow pages and found the PI with the best ad. I went down to his office and gave him a retainer. After that, I went into work. Tracy, my secretary, told me to call my wife immediately. She said Linda had called 20 times already, and something was definitely wrong. I explained that Linda and I were having problems and I was not going to return her calls. I directed Tracy to convey that message during her next call. I also phoned the receptionist in the front lobby. instructing her not to allow Linda access to the offices if she were to come by. I aimed to give the private investigator a chance to uncover information. Now, it was simply a waiting game. After that afternoon, Andrea, our neighbor, called, and though I anticipated the topic would be Linda, I answered to avoid seeming impolite. Linda's friend, Andrea, initiated the conversation, explaining Linda's efforts to apologize and my refusal to talk to her. I affirmed that I had nothing to discuss with Linda. Andrea sighed slightly, mentioning Linda's denial of any infidelity and urging me not to believe such suspicions. I admitted to believing Linda might be cheating, citing her peculiar behavior for over 2 months and the events of the other night. Andrea questioned my confirmation as Linda insisted they only danced. I clarified that I witnessed them exchanging looks before the guy approached our table, behaving rudely. Linda sided with him, and despite my warning, she danced with him. I expressed my suspicion that they were romantically involved. Linda attempted to reassure me, claiming she had not observed any evidence of cheating and emphasizing Linda's acknowledgement of her mistake. She pleaded with me to talk to Linda, insisting that avoidance wouldn't solve anything. I acknowledged Andrea's point, but requested time for contemplation. I asked her to convey that I would call Linda in a couple of weeks. Andrea promised to deliver the message, urging me to call Linda. After our conversation, I pondered Andrea's words. Despite the doubts, I couldn't picture her lying to me. Over the next 2 weeks, I remained on edge, checking in with the investigator who had no updates. Eventually, he called me to his office and handed over a manila packet. Opening it with shaky hands, he instructed me to skip to the bottom of page 5 for the essential information. Nervously flipping through the pages, I reached the bottom of page 5. Proof. After an exhaustive investigation, this office found no evidence supporting the client's suspicions of spousal infidelity. I was dumbfounded. Unsure how to react, I looked back up at the man across the desk. I inquired about the certainty of the investigation's findings. The investigator assured me that they had tracked Linda's every move for the past 2 weeks, employing house surveillance, call monitoring, tailing her outings, and checking phone records and credit card statements. He conveyed that there were no signs of an affair. Overwhelmed with relief, I struggled to hold back tears in his office. The investigator advised me to go home to my wife and child, emphasizing the rarity of happy endings in his line of work. Expressing gratitude, I left and returned to my motel room, needing time to process everything. Over the weekend, I reflected on every detail. On Monday morning, I called Linda. She answered weakly and shakily. I identified myself and asked if she was okay, expressing concern about her sounding unwell. After a short pause, Linda apologized, admitting regret for taking me for granted. She acknowledged my correctness in warning the guy at the club and started crying again, confessing her lack of respect despite loving and respecting me. Linda pleaded for another chance, vowing never to make the same mistake. Her plea surprised me, considering her attitude at the dance club. When I didn't respond immediately, she assumed the worst. "You're not coming back, are you?" "Yes, I am." I reassured her, clarifying that it would be on a trial basis. I expressed my desire to have my original wife back, the woman I fell in love with and married. Linda insisted that she was here, waiting for the man she loves. Skeptical, I mentioned the bad attitudes, lack of passion, and disrespect I had experienced over the past 2 months. Despite her sincerity, I remained unconvinced. I informed her that I would collect my belongings from the motel after work and be home that night. After a moment of silence, she expressed her love for me and apologized for the way she had treated me. She conveyed her deep regret and emphasized her fear of losing me. I can't say I didn't still have reservations. I was still upset, and even with all the evidence to the contrary, I just couldn't shake the feeling that Linda knew that guy. At the dance hall after work, I picked up my clothes and went home. Jennifer came running and almost tackled me at the door. She asked where I had been. I explained I had been out of town for a while. She obviously knew nothing of our problems. Linda was right there also. She put her arms around me and showered me with kisses. I passionately kissed her back. In the end, I couldn't deny I loved my wife. That was 2 years ago, and married life has been wonderful again. Linda is once more the woman I married, both in and out of the bedroom. A couple of months ago, she threw me a surprise birthday party. In the past, we always treated Linda's birthday as a special day, but only started celebrating mine after my return home. Last night was our 14th wedding anniversary. This time, Linda planned the entire evening. When I returned home from work, she surprised me with tickets for a dinner playhouse to see Man of La Mancha one of my favorite plays. After we drove down to the lakefront and walked along the beach, enjoying the moonlight and warm breezes from the lake, I expressed gratitude for the wonderful anniversary, put my arm around her, and pulled her close. She coyly acknowledged the excitement in my pants, to which I agreed that we should head home to address it. About half an hour later, we were in our bedroom, tearing at each other's clothes. To this day, I remain uncertain if she was cheating on me. I'll probably never know for sure, but I'm glad I chose to come back home. Although spring had officially begun on the calendar a few weeks prior, it was only on this day that I could venture out without my winter coat, marking the end of another Chicago winter. Stepping outside, I inhaled the lingering fresh scent of morning dew from an overnight April shower. I fondly remembered the warm, secure feeling wrapped in my husband's arms while listening to the gentle rhythm of the rain. En route to my car, I marveled at the beautiful blue wildflowers resiliently growing in the lawn. Despite the severity of the winter, they persisted in their pursuit of a new beginning, a fresh start at life. Each spring, I would sing along with the car radio on my way to a quaint coffee shop to meet Kathy, a good friend I hadn't seen in a while. Kathy's son was the same age as Jennifer, my daughter. We became fast friends years ago at a school function and have remained close ever since. Kathy, already seated at a small table in the corner by the window, waved and smiled through the glass as I passed on my way to the front door. The aroma of fresh brewed coffee filled the busy cafe as I joined the line of customers waiting for my cup of Colombian heaven. Spotting me, Kathy stood up. We greeted each other warmly with giggles as we hugged before taking our seats. I remarked that it had been a while and inquired about how she had been. Kathy's eyes sparkled as she answered me. The conversation flowed, encompassing old times and laughter over amusing incidents at school functions. As we discussed our children, both acknowledged how quickly they grow up. About an hour into our conversation, Kathy leaned over the table and lowered her voice. I mind locking my lips with a key and responded, "What's up?" Kathy explained that she had been kind of seeing a guy. My head snapped up from sipping my coffee as I met her eyes. I asked, "What do you mean? Kind of seeing this guy? Are you having an affair?" Kathy responded with an impish half-smile. Kathy shared that she hadn't done anything yet, but was considering having a fling with a guy named Cody. She acknowledged the naughtiness of it, but expressed feeling a live one with him. She admitted liking Cody, and feared he might lose interest if they didn't become more involved. In response, I asked if she was willing to risk her marriage for him. Kathy clarified that she had no intention of marrying Cody and just wanted a little fling, referring to it as the spice of life with a smile. She assured me that she would make sure her husband Bruce wouldn't find out, emphasizing how it would crush him if he knew she was with someone else. Kathy added that Cody was married too, highlighting the need for both of them to be cautious. For the past 2 years, I had harbored a secret that remained undisclosed, with no intention of sharing it with anyone. As I looked at my friend, I made the decision to take a risk. Recalling the past, I asked Kathy to think back to a couple of years ago, when Harry and I were going through a rough patch. He actually left me for a while, and she acknowledged remembering it, but mentioned she never knew the details. I confessed that I never disclosed it to anyone and emphasized the importance of her promise to keep it a secret. After a moment, Kathy assured me that she promised not to reveal it, understanding the potential impact on her own marriage. As a waitress brought fresh coffee, I waited until our cups were filled before continuing. I shared that, after 12 years of marriage, I felt a sense of boredom, with everything becoming routine. It was strange considering all those years had passed, and I found myself questioning what I was doing and where I was going. I felt stuck, lacking a real life for myself. Kathy interjected, expressing understanding of my feelings. She shared that she knew precisely how I felt, believing that most women experience similar emotions. It wasn't about not loving our husbands, she emphasized, as she loved Harry with all her heart. However, suddenly, it seemed like that love wasn't enough, and something was missing. She admitted slipping into a slight depression, where nothing seemed fun anymore, and not even lovemaking. Despite Harry going above and beyond for her, especially in the bedroom, she couldn't find happiness. Even school functions became a drag, she added. After taking a sip of my coffee and glancing at Kathy to gauge if my story was resonating, I could see that I had her attention. So I continued. I then met Terry. I confirmed it with a slight nod of my head when Kathy asked if I had an affair. I admitted that it was an emotional affair, expressing relief that it hadn't escalated into something physical. I sighed and conveyed gratitude for that. Describing Terry as gorgeous, with rugged good looks, sandy blonde hair, and flashing blue eyes like Robert Redford, I noted he was tall, standing over 6 feet, and even with his clothes on, I could see he had a nice build. I acknowledged that I was staring but couldn't bring myself to look away until he caught me. I blushed when he looked at me and smiled, and we started to flirt with each other. The experience was exciting and felt thrilling. Eventually, I came to my senses and continued with my shopping down the produce aisle. Recapping, I recounted the encounter when I reached for some tomatoes and accidentally bumped into him. He greeted me with those captivating big blue eyes and a charming smile, saying, "Hi, Kathy." Uncomfortably, I admitted feeling a physical response which embarrassed me. Hoping he wouldn't notice, I blushed and recalled the awkward moment. Despite observing my wedding rings, he extended his hand for a shake and introduced himself. Surprisingly, his awareness of my marital status didn't dissuade him from expressing interest, and I found it flattering that someone like him could be attracted to me. He continued with conversation and jokes as we moved through the aisles, gathering the items we needed. Upon reaching the checkout, he offered me his number, suggesting I call him for lunch the following week. Kathy was now hanging on every word of my story, expressing how familiar it sounded, almost prompting me to toss Terry's card away. As I left the store, my thoughts echoed. Yeah, right. I'm going to call you, and we're going to have this intensely hot romantic love affair. And then my husband will finish off us both. I admitted that I didn't throw his card away, but kept it in my purse. On the way home, my mind was consumed with thoughts of Terry. When Harry arrived home as I put away groceries, I already felt guilty and snapped at him when he tried to help. It seemed like an unconscious defense mechanism. Poor Harry asked if something was wrong. In response to Kathy's eager question about what I said, I confessed that I lied, telling Harry I was just a little tired from shopping. In truth, I was secretly walking on cloud 9. Continuing my narrative, I acknowledged that I knew I shouldn't call Terry, considering it was wrong, and that I was vulnerable due to my emotions. Despite telling myself, no, I couldn't resist the temptation. I found one of the last payphones in the city and dialed the number on Terry's card. We arranged to have lunch the following day. With anxious anticipation, Kathy waited for me to take another sip of coffee before continuing. On our way to the restaurant, I shared with Kathy that my emotions were all over the place. Terrified and excited simultaneously, not to mention feeling incredibly aroused. During our conversation, Terry reached over the table and held my hand, evoking that familiar excitement. It felt like being the kid on my first date. Despite a strong desire to go to bed with him, my conscience or perhaps fear held me back, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. In response to my sharing, Kathy noted that Terry persisted in his attempts, discussing Harry without recognizing the value of the woman he had and failing to appreciate Kathy. She admitted to being influenced by his words, leading to resentment towards her own husband. In a short span, Terry successfully convinced her that Harry was taking her for granted, resonating with the situation she believed she was currently facing. I explained my motive for sharing all this with Kathy, expressing a desire for her to be aware of the situation she might be getting into. Curious, I inquired if the guy she was seeing had begun talking about Bruce yet. Kathy shook her head, asserting that there were no issues in her marriage. However, in the brief pause that followed, I sensed a subtle uncertainty lingering in her words. Continuing our conversation, I probed deeper, asking if she too had started to question her situation. Kathy acknowledged the growing realization, prompting me to reflect on my own experiences. I explained to her how when Harry left, he pointed out my constant irritability, which I had been unaware of for over 2 months. This pattern extended to the bedroom, where I found it challenging to muster passion for a man who appeared to take me for granted. As I continued with my story, I could see understanding slowly spreading across Kathy's face. I urged her to consider the situation and asked, "Think about it, Kathy. What kind of man has an affair with a married woman? Can you imagine Bruce doing it?" "Bruce? No, of course not. He'd never do anything like that," Kathy affirmed, seeking validation. I then questioned her, "So why risk your marriage over someone who would?" While Kathy pondered the recent revelations, I continued sharing my story. Anyway, we had lunch again the next week, and fidelity to Harry became increasingly challenging. By the third lunch, Terry almost persuaded me to go back to his apartment. Seeing his frustration with my excuses, I realized that another lunch might lead us to spend the night together. As we left the restaurant after that third lunch, I casually mentioned my need for a new dress, as Harry was planning to take me out for our anniversary. I spoke of a dance club where we used to have fun, and Terry seized the opportunity. Arrogantly, he declared his intention to be there and dance with me, claiming it would teach Harry a lesson about my desirability. Despite my objections, he insisted it could make Harry appreciate me more. Kathy expressed disbelief and concern, asking if Terry had actually shown up. I confirmed that he did, revealing that I noticed him as soon as we entered the venue. Despite the awkward situation, I refrained from saying anything, not wanting to spoil the enjoyable time Harry and I were having. However, matters took a turn when Terry approached and invited me to dance. Kathy reacted with shock, whispering and astonished, "Oh my God." To worsen the situation, Terry completely ignored Harry and behaved rudely towards him. Understandably, Harry became defensive and issued an ultimatum, insisting that I couldn't dance with Terry. Stubbornly, I got angry and declared my intention to dance with Terry anyway, despite Harry's warning that he wouldn't be there when we returned from the dance floor. I dismissed it. As we began dancing, I confronted Terry about his rude behavior in front of Harry, questioning why he had to act that way. Terry explained that he wanted to put Harry in his place, further fueling my anger. Despite Terry holding me close on the dance floor, my primary concern was that Harry was watching, and I feared his heightened upset. I was so preoccupied that I didn't even realize the first dance had ended, and we were already on to our second. When the dance was over, I told Terry not to ask for any more. I insisted I was going to spend the rest of the evening with my husband. On my way back to the table, I noticed Harry was following me. I confronted him, asking what he thought he was doing. He claimed he wanted to apologize to Harry. Upon returning to the table, Harry wasn't there. Terry sat down, stating he'd wait with me until he returned. I doubted he had any intention of apologizing. It seemed more like he wanted to toy with Harry some more. "Why?" Kathy asked. "Why would he want to do that?" I thought about it and concluded he must have figured that since he hadn't succeeded in getting me into bed yet, he'd create trouble between Harry and me. I was sure he hoped I'd turn to him for comfort, imagining he'd console me between the sheets. As the night wore on, I suspected Harry was in the men's room. I told Terry to go back to his table, but he kept stalling. When the waitress came over, he ordered us drinks. That's when she asked if we wanted to start another tab. I wondered aloud about the first tab, questioning its necessity. She explained that Harry had paid up before his sudden departure, leaving me stunned and feeling abandoned. As I narrated the events, Kathy's face mirrored my distress, and her own emotions began to surface. A solitary tear escaped from Kathy's eye and rolled down her cheek. Kathy voiced concern, suggesting we stop discussing it, given my emotional state. Despite her suggestion, I insisted on sharing the whole story, believing it was crucial for her to know. I continued, recalling how in the aftermath, I reached out to Harry, urging him to return and pick me up. That's when he dropped the bombshell, suspecting an affair, particularly with Terry. Harry declared his intention to pack a bag, leaving me uncertain about his return. I reached for a napkin, dabbing my eyes as I explained to Kathy how the realization hit me with overwhelming force. It was as if someone had suddenly turned on the lights, bringing everything into sharp focus. I acknowledged that it wasn't Harry taking me for granted. Rather, it was me, taking him, Jennifer, and our life together for granted. The weight of risking my entire marriage over someone undeserving struck me. Despite pleading with Harry to return for a conversation, he refused, leaving me with no choice but to call a cab. Kathy, curious about Terry's role in the situation, asked what he had been doing. I shared that Terry persisted, claiming Harry didn't deserve me and urging me to go home with him. I chuckled as I recounted, telling him to drop dead. Even after that strong dismissal, Terry tried one last time. Outside, as the cab pulled in, he attempted to kiss me. In response, I swiftly delivered a knee to his groin, warning him of an inappropriate contact suit if he ever tried to contact me again. Kathy reached over, offering support as I wiped away more tears. Recounting the events, I shared how upon reaching home, I discovered Harry had left. My attempts to contact him were futile as his cell was turned off. The fear of my marriage unraveling and losing everything we had built overwhelmed me. It was the most scared I had ever been. Desperation led me to confide in Andrea, our neighbor, hoping Harry might open up to her. He did, but his only response was the need for time to think, promising to call in a couple of weeks. Realizing pressure would backfire, I decided to give him space, enduring what felt like the worst 2 weeks of my life. In the presence of our daughter Jennifer, I maintained a facade of strength, explaining that Daddy was out of town. Yet, in moments of solitude, tears flowed uncontrollably. I feared I had irreparably damaged my relationship with Harry, especially if he believed I was unfaithful. In tears, I apologized to Kathy, finding it difficult to discuss even now. After a deep breath, I continued, sharing the painful journey. As I revealed the details, I emphasized how close I came to losing everything and how it made me realize the significance of what I had. Love, I emphasized to Kathy, had to surpass lust. The love between Harry and me was irreplaceable, and I considered myself incredibly fortunate. Kathy responded in a contemplative tone, expressing understanding and admitting she wouldn't know how to handle her husband leaving. When asked if I ever told Harry the truth, I explained that I couldn't risk it, given the closeness of losing him. Being in constant fear of him discovering the truth, I emphasized how I've tried to be the best wife since the day he came home. No longer taking him or our marriage for granted, I expressed gratitude daily and showed Harry my appreciation with passionate sincerity. Despite the lingering fear, I could only hope that my efforts would be enough if he ever discovered the truth. Kathy reassured me with a comforting squeeze of the hand, expressing gratitude for sharing my story and averting a potential mistake. Grateful for the conversation, we discussed tentative plans for our next meeting before parting ways. I felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing I had prevented my friend from making a regrettable decision. Upon arriving home, I had ample time to welcome my daughter Jennifer with a kiss and an after-school snack. Reflecting on how quickly she was growing up, I marveled at the passage of time, realizing she would soon be 10 years old. Time flies, I thought to myself. When Harry returned from work, I greeted him warmly with hugs and kisses. It struck me that I had never opened up about that painful period in our marriage until that day. Conversing with Kathy served as a reminder of the wonderful life Harry and I had built together. Later that night, Harry lay beside me, peacefully asleep. I turned on my side, propping myself up on my elbow, and traced the lines on his face, each one telling a story of the years we'd shared. With a delicate touch, I followed the faint outline of a few, my heart swelling with love and admiration for the man lying next to me. Leaning down, I pressed my lips to his, and to my delight, his smile met mine. He pulled me into a passionate kiss, his arms wrapping around me. Whispering, I expressed my surprise, thinking he was asleep. Harry chuckled, revealing he had been deep in thought about Jennifer's upcoming birthday. When I suggested a baby brother or sister for her, it wasn't entirely unexpected. We had discussed it before without reaching a decision. His smile seemed to signal an end to that debate. With Jennifer's birthday just 2 months away, I playfully hinted at getting started. Harry's broad smile indicated he was on board. 2 months later, we celebrated Jennifer's 10th birthday with a big backyard party, inviting all her friends and ensuring plenty of ice cream and cake for everyone. After the festivities, we surprised our daughter with an additional lavish gift: the news of a new baby brother joining our family.